Outbound shipments from South Korea came to around $59.8 billion last month, the highest for any June on record. Strong global demand for semiconductors and automobiles led to the all-time high result. After ruling out the possibility of extending the July 9 tariffs deadline, the White House says President Donald Trump will meet with his trade team this week to finalize tariff rates for countries. Sweltering heat is blanketing the entire country. The daily average temperature in Daegu came to 30.7 degrees Celsius on Monday, while Busan saw 26.2 degrees, the hottest day in the city for June since the data began being collected in 1904. South Korea's exports made a rebound last month, in fact, posting the highest figures for any June in history, thanks to brisk chip and car shipments. Our Park Juna leads us off tonight.
Exports in June reached an all-time high of $59.8 billion, up 4.3% from a year earlier, according to data released on Tuesday by the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy. Imports rose 3.3% to $50.72 billion, resulting in a trade surplus of $9.08 billion. Among the country's 15 major export items, 6 showed growth. Notably, semiconductors fueled this, marking a historic $15 billion in June, up 11.6%, and continuing a 4-month upward trend. This helped overseas shipments of semiconductors reach $73.3 billion for the first half of 2025, the highest ever performance over that period.
Previously, market demand for semiconductors was driven by mobile devices, but it has now shifted to AI and data centers. Strong memory sales, particularly high bandwidth memory, and a surge in AI data center investment are the fundamental drivers behind the recent growth in semiconductor exports.
Automobile shipments also hit an all-time high for June at $6.3 billion, marking a 2.3% increase from a year earlier. Robust deliveries were driven by high EU demand for electric vehicles and a whopping 67.9% surge in used car exports to $670 million. By region, June exports saw growth in 7 of its 9 major trading regions, excluding the United States and China. Although exports to the United States and China saw a slight decrease of 0.5% and 2.7% respectively, exports to regions such as the European Union and the Middle East saw a significant increase of over at least 14%. The economic experts stated that the drop in exports to the United States and China reflects a shift in the global trading order.
The drop in exports after Trump's tariff hikes is a major setback, especially since exports were expected to rise. South Korea exports intermediate goods to China, which China then ships as final products to the U.S. So tariffs on China hit us too. As existing markets shrink, we naturally look for new ones, leading to a shift in the trading order, with more exports heading outside the U.S. and China.
In the meantime, Trade Minister An Deok-keun said the government plans to respond proactively to the immediate challenges in the Korea-U.S. negotiations and will soon prepare export support measures such as trade financing and the identification of alternative markets to minimize the negative impact on industries. Park Juna, Arirang News.
So the record high export figures from June are a relief for now, but chip and car exports, the backbone of South Korean economy, may soon be challenged following the end of the Trump administration's tariffs grace period. So how to brace for the potential impact? Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
The stakes couldn't be higher as South Korea's heavy dependence on exports, especially to the United States, leaves its core industries vulnerable. With the July 8th deadline fast approaching, Seoul is racing to secure a deal that shields its automakers and semiconductor producers from hefty new tariffs.
I believe Korea needs to emphasize that its economic growth leads to more factories and jobs being created in the United States, and use that to steer negotiations in a direction that benefits both countries.
Recent moves by Hyundai Motor Group underscore that point, with the company pledging over $21 billion in investments across the U.S. over the next 3 years. The move perhaps testifies to experts' claims that autos are the most exposed. Under Section 232 of the U.S. Trade Expansion Act, Washington currently slaps a 25% tariff on imported vehicles and auto parts, a duty both Korea and Japan have been pushing to reduce.
Among all the tariffs Korea faces from the U.S. right now, the most critical issue is the auto sector. If this isn't resolved, we're likely to see significant damage, not just for finished cars, but also for parts, steel, and aluminum, since all these tariffs are heavily concentrated on automobiles.
Without a breakthrough, Korea's automakers and a web of suppliers could suffer severe losses. Some experts suggest that ramping up local manufacturing in the U.S. may be the most immediate way to cushion the blow.
By using production facilities over there, we can effectively offset tariffs on parts as well. So at this point, I think expanding and maximizing manufacturing operations in the U.S., rather than producing everything domestically, is actually the best alternative we have.
But they caution this could mean fewer jobs and contracts for Korea's own factories and parts makers. That's why experts say tariffs will ultimately need to be tackled at the negotiating table. They point out that South Korea's shipbuilding capacity could serve as leverage, while even adjustments to defense cost-sharing might come into play. Kim Do-hyun, Arirang News.
President Jae Myung presided over the weekly cabinet meeting on Tuesday. There, he urged the cabinet members to respect members of the National Assembly who have been selected by the people. Now, also addressed were a host of issues related to people's livelihoods. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min has more.
국회는 국민으로부터 직접 권력을 위임받은 기관이어서 우리 국무위원들께서 국회에 가시면 그 직접 선출된 권력에 대해서 존중감을 가져주시면 좋겠어요. 국가의 기본적 질서에 관한 문제니까.
President Lee Jae-myung began Tuesday's cabinet meeting by noting that all power comes from the people and officials elected by the people come before those who were appointed. He pointed out that there seems to be a misunderstanding with Parliament and urged the cabinet to respect the Assembly. Present at the meeting were some of the cabinet members from the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration. He went on to pay attention to the livelihoods of the people, particularly the vulnerable, with the nation in the middle of the summer rainy season.
이게 지금 혹서기가 도래하면 어쨌든 또 뭐 쪽방이니 뭐 이런 노인 취약계층들이 또 위기를 겪습니다. 또 각별히 관심 갖도록 잘 관리해 주시기 부탁드립니다.
He also turned to another matter affecting the lives of Koreans, real estate. He said the stock and financial markets have been recently normalized and began to serve as investment options other than the property market, pointing to a tendency in Korea where speculation in real estate often leads to housing market instability. Last week, the nation's financial watchdog announced strict measures to tighten household lending to curb soaring home prices in the capital. Discussions on Tuesday included how to use some of the land left fallow in the border area of Gyeonggi-do province following the relocation of the U.S. military sites to Pyeongtaek.
President Lee instructed the Defense Ministry to proactively review and report measures to deal with the issues regarding the land returned by the U.S. Forces Korea in northern Gyeonggi-do province.
Among the items endorsed at the cabinet meeting was an agreement to establish a free trade zone between South Korea and Ecuador aimed at expanding bilateral trade and investment. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
President Jae Myung spoke over the phone with his UAE counterpart Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan on Tuesday for the first time since taking office last month. President Yi expressed hopes to bolster the special strategic partnership between Korea and the UAE. The leaders agreed to strengthen bilateral cooperation on AI, cutting-edge technology, the defense industry, and nuclear power. He also held a phone call with New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon to discuss elevating their comprehensive strategic partnership. Noting New Zealand's contribution during the Korean War, he hoped to bolster cooperation with the country in the economic, defense, and science sectors. He also discussed with the foreign leaders further cooperation in time for the upcoming APEC summit here in Korea later this year. First Lady Kim Hye-kyung on Tuesday attended the opening ceremony of the 4th edition of Women Entrepreneurs Week. There, she expressed hope that women in business who've played a key role in supporting the domestic economy will help the lead country through challenges. According to the top office, the First Lady met with female entrepreneurs to offer encouragement and presented government awards to exemplary businesswomen. The Ministry of SMEs and Startups hosts events each year during the first week of July to recognize outstanding contributions by women-led businesses. Now, this year's program runs through Friday. It's been 1 month since President Jae Myung took office. It's still early days, but we zoom in on the course of his foreign affairs and security policies, which he has defined as pragmatic diplomacy. For this, we have our Oh Soo-young in the studio. Welcome back, Soo-young.
Hi, Tammy. It's great to be back.
So, Soo-young, it's been 1 month. How would you summarize the first month of his so-called pragmatic diplomacy?
Well, Tammy, I think it's been quite an interesting mix of both continuity and change from the previous Yoon administration. In being pragmatic, the Yi government has clearly kept Seoul's global diplomacy intact at his first multilateral summit at the G7. Now, holding at least 10 individual summits with world leaders, his focus was to reinforce South Korea's position in the international community as a vibrant democratic partner after 6 months of a leadership vacuum following former President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law crisis last year. Now, there's continuity, too, in South Korea's strategic relationships. His first phone calls with world leaders were made in the order of the US, Japan, and then China. Now, that's really interesting, as it mirrors the previous Yoon administration's priorities, emphasizing the South Korea-US alliance, as well as a future-oriented partnership with Tokyo. That's been quite surprising, given how past progressive leaders have shown more affinity towards China than Japan, emphasizing historical disputes with the latter. Now, where there's been some recalibration is when it comes to values. Now, the former Yoon administration endorsed liberal democratic values as the basis for cooperation. But the new Lee Jae-myung administration has indicated that it will focus on what serves Korean interests, not necessarily values. So that includes diversifying its cooperation and working with countries like China and Russia, avoiding the so-called bloc-based mentality. On North Korea, Lee's strategy is clearly geared towards lowering tensions. Even in the first month of his presidency, he decided to withhold psychological warfare tactics such as loudspeaker broadcasts along the border, and he's initiated crackdowns on South Korean groups, sending anti-North Korea regime flyers over the border. So all of this is a very sharp contrast to the tit-for-tat escalation under the previous administration.
Indeed, and his top policymakers will initiate this pragmatic diplomacy. Let's turn to his ministerial nominees for key defense, diplomatic, and security positions. What does his selection of ministers really indicate?
Right, so President Lee Jae-myung's picks for the Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Unification and Defense, it really represents a decisive pivot, I would say, towards the institutional experience and also peace rather than deterrence towards North Korea. Now, Foreign Minister nominee Cho Yeon is a career diplomat with decades of experience in multilateral diplomacy. He's emphasized the importance of diversifying Korea's diplomatic interests, and speaking during an interview, Cho said that it was time to move beyond what he called the stereotype that diplomacy for South Korea begins and ends with the United States. But at the same time, he's acknowledged America's centrality in building peace with North Korea, saying that achieving the US-North Korea dialogue, or summit rather, and establishing peace on the Korean Peninsula is one of the administration's top priorities. Now, the nominee for Unification Minister Chung Dong-young is also no stranger to the inter-Korean agenda. He's held the same position during the previous Nomuyon administration, and he played a very central role in organizing the 2007 Inter-Korean Summit. And he said that he supports the possible US-North Korea talks, noting that they would help ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula and contribute to peace and stability. He's also made headlines by suggesting that the very name Ministry of Unification may be outdated and that the ministry should shift its emphasis away from the symbolic unification rhetoric and instead focus on concrete goals like humanitarian cooperation and sustainable coexistence between the South and North. Now, a particularly significant appointment is Ang Kyu-baek as Defense Minister. Now, he would be the first civilian to hold the post in more than 6 decades. His nomination represents the democratic oversight of the military, particularly after the martial law crisis last year, as well as reform to better support armed forces amid sharp technological and geopolitical changes. He's also emphasized the need for a peaceful overture between the South and North to create the mood for military tensions to be eased.
Well, Seong, last but not least, I have to ask, is the South Korea-US summit still expected in late July? If so, what are the stakes?
Well, I believe so, Tammy. So officials from both governments, they've confirmed this week that a summit in Washington is being arranged, and that's most likely for the week of July 21st. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio is, in fact, widely expected, not confirmed though, by many, to stop by in Seoul earlier in July to finalize the grounds for this possible summit. And, well, the 3 issues that the 2 leaders are expected to discuss are, first of all, America's tariffs on South Korea's foremost industrial goods, especially with Washington ending its grace period next Wednesday. Also, defense spending, as the United States calls on allies to pay more towards their own security and even cover areas outside their traditional cost-sharing agreements, such as the deployment of US tactical assets. Another issue could possibly be, of course, North Korea, as President Lee moves to lower tensions while President Trump signals interest in resuming his dialogue with the North Korean leader. Now, if Lee and Trump were, they were both expected to meet at the G7 summit in Canada last month, but that meeting didn't take place as the US leader left early amid the Israel-Iran conflict. So their upcoming summits, that's going to be a major test of how the Lee administration balances alliance management with South Korea's national interest.
So the first high-stakes meeting for Lee's pragmatic diplomacy. Let's see what happens later this month. Seong, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks very much for having me, Tammy.
It's rainy season here in Korea, but with heavy monsoon downpours taking a break, sweltering heat is on the rise. Seoul has seen its 2nd straight tropical night of the season, while a heat wave advisory remains in effect. Our Shin Ha-young has more.
South Korea continues to face heat waves and tropical nights. As of Tuesday, most parts of the country, including Seoul, were under heat advisories. The capital saw the season's first heat wave advisory being issued on Monday, just a day after it experienced its first tropical night of the summer. Monday night's temperature stayed above 25 degrees Celsius, marking the 2nd consecutive tropical night. A heat advisory is issued when the day's highest perceived temperature is expected to stay at 33 degrees Celsius or above for 2 or more days. However, Seoul's heatwave advisory came 11 days later than last year. Still, the sweltering heat is expected to remain not just in Seoul but nationwide.
As the hot and humid North Pacific high-pressure area covers our country, a large amount of hot and humid water vapor is flowing in along its edge.
The Korean Meteorological Administration raised the advisories to heat warnings on Tuesday in regions including parts of Gangwon-do, Gyeongsang-buk-do, and Jeollanam-do provinces. A heat wave warning is issued when the highest perceived temperature is expected to reach 35 degrees or higher for 2 or more consecutive days, or when major damage is expected from the heat. The sweltering heat is hitting the entire country, breaking June temperature records in many areas. According to the Korean Meteorological Administration on Tuesday, Busan recorded an average daily temperature of 26.2 degrees Celsius on Monday, the hottest day in June since records began in April 1904. Daegu also saw its hottest June day on record with an average daily temperature of 30.7 degrees Celsius, the highest since records began in January 1907. The intense heat also led to the death of a woman in her 60s who had been working in a field in Jinju, Gyeongsangnam-do province. She was found unresponsive on Sunday afternoon, with police saying they believe she died of heat stroke. The KMA advises vulnerable groups, including the elderly and children, to take extra care to stay hydrated and limit outdoor activities. 신하영, Arirang News.
After mediating the Israel-Iran ceasefire, U.S. President Donald Trump is now looking to put pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to end the Gaza war by inviting him to the White House next week. Our Pyongyang has the details.
U.S. President Donald Trump is set to host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House next Monday, as Washington ramps up efforts to end the war in Gaza. Unnamed U.S. officials confirmed the visit, which comes amid a renewed push to broker a ceasefire. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, during a briefing on Monday, reaffirmed the administration's commitment to ending the conflict.
I also know that this administration is in constant communication with Israeli leadership, and the president himself speaks frequently, as you know, to Prime Minister Netanyahu. But this has been a priority for the president since he took office, to end this brutal war in Gaza.
Netanyahu's upcoming visit comes as the U.S., after striking Iranian nuclear sites and brokering a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, shifts focus to ending the Israel-Hamas conflict. On the same day, according to AP News, Israeli forces left at least 74 people dead in Gaza. The deadliest attack targeted a beachfront cafe crowded with women and children. It was one of the few remaining places during the war where civilians could charge their phones and access the internet.
An F-16 missile, a war missile, military aircraft, not a drone or a bomb or a shell from a boat. The F-16 shook the place. It struck this place, as you can see. Pools of blood, piles of martyrs. I mean, if you had seen the scene from the beginning, there were piles of martyrs.
Faraz Awad, a Gaza Health Ministry official, said at least 30 were killed and dozens injured in the cafe strike. Local medical officials reported 15 more deaths on a Gaza City street, 6 in a separate building strike, 11 civilians shot while searching for food, and 10 killed at a UN aid warehouse. While Israel maintains it only targets militants, Gaza's health ministry reports that more than 56,000 Palestinians, many of them civilians, have been killed since the war began. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Seoul has recorded 2 consecutive tropical nights now. It felt as hot as 32 degrees Celsius during the day today. Not only in Seoul, heatwave warnings and advisories were issued in most parts of the country. The daytime temperature in Samcheok and Gyeongju rose up to 36 degrees during the day. This heat wave will continue tomorrow. In addition, we need to prepare for strong UV rays. High levels of ultraviolet rays will cover the skies around the country. Around the eastern and southern parts of the country, very high levels of UV rays will continue tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow morning will be even hotter than today at around 24 to 26 degrees. Highs will move up to 32 degrees in Daejeon, 35 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. No rain is expected for the time being. Please take good care of your health. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. For all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.